It was a quiet day in the United Human Coalition's Deep Space Communication Center. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions, their soft glow filling the space around the fleet's command ship, Saratoga. Inside, the crew was performing their usual duties, monitoring signals and managing routine operations. But then something unusual appeared on the radar, an urgent distress signal from an unknown source, echoing through the void of space. The signal was faint, broken, and filled with static, but there was a clear message buried within the noise. A race of aliens, the Elorians, was in desperate need of help. Their sun was collapsing, and their planet was dying. In their final moments, they reached out, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear their call. They had nowhere else to turn. The message was simple. Please, we beg you, save us. On Earth, such a plea was never taken lightly. The United Human Coalition, made up of representatives from Earth and its colonies across the stars, immediately began debating what to do. Humanity had faced countless challenges throughout its history, wars, disasters, and struggles. But this was different. This was a galaxy-wide cry for help from a species on the brink of extinction. The crew of the Saratoga gathered in the briefing room. The message was still being deciphered by the team of linguists and engineers, but the urgency was clear. The Elorians were an advanced species, capable of great technology and knowledge. Yet their sun was dying, and their planet was slipping from their grasp. The message was their last attempt to survive. "I don't know why they turned to us," said Captain Jessica Hayes, looking at the holographic map of the Elorian system. "We're not the strongest force in the galaxy. We don't have the resources of the Zircons or the Uthra. Why would they send their distress call to us?" Commander Jason Patel, the fleet's operations officer, looked at the captain thoughtfully. "Maybe they've reached out to everyone else, and they've all turned them down. We know how other species think. They're looking out for themselves, not for others. It could be that humanity is their last hope." Captain Hayes nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the flickering light of the Elorian system on the map. Despite the challenges humanity had faced, there was something about their history that was different. They had always been the underdogs, but they had also always fought for the lost and forgotten, even when it seemed impossible. It was this spirit that set them apart. After a long pause, the room grew silent as the gravity of the situation settled in. Humanity had a decision to make. Would they stand by, as the other civilizations had done, or would they answer the Elorians' call and risk everything for a species they had never met? The choice wasn't easy. The debate raged on for hours. Some argued that it wasn't worth the risk. After all, humanity had their own problems. There were still conflicts, poverty, and rebuilding efforts on Earth and its colonies. A rescue mission would take months, if not years, and it would stretch resources thin. Others pointed out that there were political and military consequences. Other galactic powers would not be happy about humanity stepping into this crisis. But there was one truth that no one could deny. Humanity had always believed in standing up for the underdog. Finally, Captain Hayes stood up, silencing the room. "We've always fought for those who had no voice. We can't turn away now. We'll go. We'll answer their call." The room was quiet for a moment, and then a wave of agreement spread among the crew. There was a shared understanding that humanity, despite its many flaws, had always carried a unique quality, a sense of compassion that transcended its own self-interest. It was this compassion that had brought humans to the stars, and it was this same compassion that would guide their decision now. The crew began making preparations for the rescue mission. Engineers scrambled to organize the fleet, scientists worked on understanding the Elorians' technology, and medics began to prepare for the health risks of a long journey. The mission would be risky, the dangers unknown, but one thing was certain: humanity was not going to turn its back on those in need. As the Saratoga and its fleet began to move toward the Elorian system, a small, hopeful flicker of light appeared in the darkness of space. The Elorians had sent their message, and humanity had chosen to listen. The decision was made. There was no turning back. And for the first time in a long while, hope began to shine across the stars. The decision had been made. Humanity would attempt the impossible. They would answer the Aelorians' call for help and do everything in their power to save a species on the brink of extinction. But there was no denying that this mission would be incredibly difficult. The human fleet was ready to move, but the road ahead was uncertain, and the obstacles seemed endless. Captain Jessica Hayes stood on the bridge of the Saratoga, looking at the star map in front of her. The Aelorian system was far from Earth. It would take weeks, even months, for the fleet to reach it. But this was not just a rescue operation. It was a race against time. The Aelorian sun was dying, and every minute they wasted meant fewer chances of survival for the Aelorians. The pressure was on, and the weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Captain, the fleet is ready for departure." Commander Jason Patel's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood next to her, his face serious but determined. "We have enough supplies to reach the Aelorian system and initiate the first phase of the rescue. But after that, well, we're going to have to rely on our wits." Captain Hayes nodded. "I know. We'll have to repurpose some of the old ships for this mission. We don't have enough advanced technology to carry all the Aelorians at once, so we'll need to be creative." The crew had only weeks to prepare for a mission that normally would have taken months. They worked around the clock, modifying older vessels and pulling together what little resources they had. Engineers stripped down ships that were meant for smaller, simpler operations and transformed them into transport ships capable of carrying large numbers of Aelorians. The medical team worked tirelessly to design emergency medical kits and stabilize supplies for a population that had never been exposed to human technology before. But the biggest challenge was the technology gap. The Aelorians were an advanced species in their own right, but their sun's collapse had forced them to abandon most of their research into space travel. They lacked the means to escape, and they had no advanced ships to protect themselves from cosmic dangers. The human fleet, however, wasn't equipped to handle an entire species relocation, let alone under such a tight time frame. Humanity had always been known for its ingenuity, though. They might not have the most powerful ships or the largest fleet, but they had something that the other galactic powers lacked: creativity. The human fleet's engineers, with their heads full of ideas, began constructing makeshift energy shields to protect the Aelorian ships from cosmic radiation. They retrofitted cargo holds to provide adequate shelter and life support for an alien species that had never experienced life in space. Every corner of the fleet was buzzing with activity. The crew's determination was evident in the way they worked, not stopping for breaks or sleep. They had a singular goal: to save the Aelorians. Despite the long hours, the human crew refused to let exhaustion defeat them. They understood the gravity of the mission. Other galactic civilizations had turned their backs on the Aelorians, seeing them as insignificant. The Zircons, a powerful species known for their military strength, had mocked the Aelorians for their weakness. The Euthra, a species that valued only wealth, had ignored the Aelorian plea, considering it a waste of resources. Even the Krilixians, who valued knowledge above all, had deemed the Aelorians' plight irrelevant. But humanity chose to act. Captain Hayes had seen the results of such apathy before. During the early days of human exploration, they had often been rejected by the larger civilizations, dismissed as a small, inexperienced species. Yet it was that very spirit of determination, of standing up for what was right even when the odds were against them, that made humans different. They didn't shy away from the hard choices. They rose to the challenge. As the fleet set course toward the Aelorian system, the crew was filled with a quiet, resolute confidence. Every ship in the fleet was a symbol of humanity's belief in hope, even when the rest of the galaxy had given up. They didn't have the resources of the larger empires, but they had something more: the will to do what others wouldn't. Weeks passed as the fleet traveled through space, each moment filled with anticipation. The crew began to understand the gravity of the situation. They were the last hope for an entire civilization. And yet, As the fleet approached the Aelorian system, another challenge arose, one that hadn't been anticipated. A transmission from the Aelorians came through the fleet's communication channels. The message was faint, distorted, and it took several moments to decode. The Aelorians had discovered that their sun was dying faster than expected. The situation had grown more dire, and they had fewer resources left than they had originally thought. "We need to move faster," Captain Hayes muttered to herself. "We don't have much time." As the Saratoga and its fleet prepared to enter the Aelorian system, the crew knew that the mission ahead would test everything they had. The risk of failure was high, but there was no turning back. The Aelorians were waiting, and humanity was ready to do whatever it took to save them. The time for hesitation was over. The rescue mission had begun. The fleet of human ships cruised through the cold void of space, their engines humming steadily as they drew closer to the Aelorian system. Captain Jessica Hayes stood on the bridge of the Saratoga, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. The countdown had begun. The Aelorian sun was burning out faster than anyone had predicted, and there was no more time to waste. Every second was precious. "We're entering the Aelorian system, Captain," Commander Jason Patil announced, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've received a signal from their planet. The sun's instability is causing major disturbances in their atmosphere. It's getting worse by the hour." Captain Hayes nodded grimly. "How much time do we have left?" "It's hard to say," Patil replied. "Their scientists are estimating less than a month before the sun's collapse becomes irreversible. After that, the planet's surface will be uninhabitable." A heavy silence filled the bridge. The weight of the mission, the stakes of their endeavor, hung over the crew like a shadow. They were humanity's last hope to save the Aelorians, a peaceful species who had never known war, but now faced extinction. "We can't waste any more time," Hayes said, her voice firm. "Set course for the planet. We need to establish a contact point on the surface and begin evacuation immediately." The Saratoga and its fleet of support ships changed direction and began their descent toward the Aelorian homeworld. The planet below was a beautiful blue-green world with sprawling oceans and vast continents. But something was wrong. The skies were darkening, the once clear atmosphere now swirling with violent storms. Lightning crackled through the clouds, and the ground trembled with the instability of the sun. "We have to hurry," Commander Patel said, his brow furrowed with concern. "The planet's stability is crumbling. If we don't evacuate soon, we risk losing everything." "Understood," Captain Hayes replied, her mind already calculating the next steps. "Prepare the landing teams. We'll need all hands on deck to coordinate the evacuation." The fleet entered the planet's atmosphere, the ships rattling as they passed through the turbulent skies. It was a rocky descent, with storms buffeting their hulls, but the human ships were built to withstand such conditions. The Saratoga glided through the chaos, heading for the coordinates that had been transmitted by the Aelorians. As they approached the surface, the first signs of the Aelorian people appeared, small groups of them, standing near the landing zones, waiting for the ships to arrive. They were an elegant species, tall and slender, with smooth, shimmering skin and large, expressive eyes. Despite their beauty, their faces were filled with fear and uncertainty. The loss of their home was a reality they had come to terms with, but the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on them. The human landing ships touched down, and the ramp lowered. The first group of Aelorians began to file onto the human ships, their faces filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. They had never imagined their species would come to this point, seeking help from others, relying on the mercy of a foreign species. Yet the humans had shown up, willing to help when no one else would. Captain Hayes stepped off the Saratoga and approached the Aelorian leader, a tall, dignified female named Kara. Her silver hair shimmered in the weak light filtering through the storm clouds, and her blue eyes were filled with both hope and disbelief. "You came," Kyra said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "I never thought anyone would." Hayes gave a small nod. Humanity doesn't leave people behind. We might not have the power to stop the sun from collapsing, but we'll do everything we can to save you." The two women shared a quiet moment, the enormity of what was happening sinking in. Kyra glanced back at her people, who were now being carefully guided onto the human ships by the medical and engineering teams. The evacuation was going smoothly, but there was still so much to be done. The Aelorians' numbers were far greater than the humans had anticipated, and the ships weren't large enough to carry them all in one trip. "This is only the beginning," Captain Hayes said, looking out over the landscape. "We need to make sure we have enough ships ready to evacuate everyone. The first wave is only a small fraction of your people." Kyra nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "We'll need your help to rebuild once we're safe. But I fear we've lost so much already. Our history, our culture, it's all tied to this planet. To leave it behind is difficult." "I understand," Hayes replied gently, "but we're not leaving it all behind. We'll help you rebuild, and you'll have a place to call home again. It won't be the same, but it will be a new beginning." The storm above grew fiercer, the sky darkening further. It was clear that the planet could no longer hold them. The evacuation was running behind schedule, and the situation was becoming more dangerous by the minute. Captain Hayes felt a surge of urgency in her chest. "Commander, we need to get the second wave moving," she said, her voice tight. "The longer we stay here, the more risk we face. We need to be ready for anything." "Right away, Captain," Paddle responded, his fingers already moving across the controls to initiate the next phase of evacuation. The fleet's engines roared to life again as the ships began to lift off. The first group of Aelorians was safely on board, but there was still more to be done. As the ships ascended into the sky, Captain Hayes watched the planet below, the once thriving world now crumbling beneath the pressure of its dying sun. They had no time to mourn. The mission was far from over. The storm clouds on Aeloria darkened as the human fleet ascended, carrying the first wave of Aelorian refugees to safety. Captain Jessica Hayes stood at the observation window on the Saratoga, watching the beautiful blue planet shrink beneath them. It was heartbreaking to think that this world, once home to an entire civilization, was now crumbling into chaos. She turned away from the window, her face hard with resolve. "We've only begun, and we're already facing challenges. We have to keep moving, keep saving as many as we can." Commander Jason Patel, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. "The next wave is ready, but we have limited space on the ships. It's not enough." "We'll make it work," Hayes replied, her voice firm. "Humanity has always found a way when things seemed impossible. We'll keep pushing forward." The fleet continued its journey through the Aelorian system, with ships coming and going in waves. It wasn't just the sun's collapse that was threatening the Aelorians. There were also natural disasters caused by the unstable atmosphere, massive earthquakes, violent storms, and volcanic eruptions. The Aelorians were caught in the middle of all this, unable to escape it on their own. That's where the humans came in. They were the only ones who had stepped forward, the only ones who still believed that saving the Aelorians was worth the risk. Back on the ships, the human crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the next phase of the evacuation. Engineers were making last-minute adjustments to the transport vessels, while medical teams continued to care for the Aelorians aboard. Captain Hayes and Commander Patel had spent hours planning every detail, from the evacuation routes to the safety protocols for transferring the Aelorians to new colonies once they were out of danger. The situation was dire, but the humans were determined to succeed. The Aelorians themselves were a calm and peaceful people, but the loss of their home had left them shaken. Many of them had never traveled off-planet before, and now they were being forced to leave everything behind. Family members, homes, and memories. Their bright eyes, usually full of wonder and hope, now looked weary and uncertain. The weight of their history seemed to press on their shoulders. As the days passed, the evacuation moved slowly but steadily. The first few waves had gone smoothly, but there were still thousands of Aelorians left to save. The human fleet wasn't built to transport so many people. The ships were running low on supplies, and the strain was beginning to show. The crew was exhausted, yet they kept working, motivated by the knowledge that they were doing something no one else had been willing to do. One night, as Captain Hayes walked the corridors of the Saratoga, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. A group of Elorians stood near a window, gazing out at the stars. There was sadness in their eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. They weren't just survivors. They were people who had lost everything, but were still looking forward to the future. It was a reminder of why they were doing this. "How are they doing?" Hayes asked, approaching the group. She had learned the names of many of the Elorians by now, but there were too many to keep track of all at once. She could only do her best to offer comfort. Kyra, the Elorian leader, turned toward her. "We are grateful, Captain, but it's hard to accept that we may never see our home again." "I know," Hayes said softly. "It's not easy, but you will rebuild. Together, we will help you find a new place to call home. You won't be alone." Kyra nodded, her eyes still filled with the weight of their loss, but there was a small spark of hope in her expression now. "Thank you." Captain Hayes smiled and gave her a reassuring nod. She didn't have all the answers, but she believed in their strength. The Elorians would survive. They had to. The evacuation continued for several more days, with the human fleet making multiple trips between the Elorian planet and the designated safe zone. The ships were filled to capacity each time, and with each departure, a little more of the Elorian world was left behind. Yet there was something beautiful in the way the humans and Elorians worked together, strangers in the vastness of space, yet united by a common purpose. On the final trip, as the last of the Elorians were boarding the transport ships, a massive tremor shook the ground. The planet's core was destabilizing. The human fleet had arrived just in time. "Get them on board. Now," Captain Hayes shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to move. The planet is about to collapse." The crew moved with precision, guiding the remaining Elorians onto the ships with practiced speed. The storm above raged harder than ever, and the atmosphere was becoming increasingly volatile. The Saratoga's engines roared as it lifted off, barely escaping the violent eruption of the planet's surface below. For a moment, as the ships pulled away from the dying planet, Captain Hayes stood at the window once more, watching as the Elorian homeworld vanished behind them. The planet, so full of life just days ago, was now a lifeless sphere. It was a sobering sight, but it was not the end for the Elorians. It was a new beginning. The fleet continued its journey through space, but the journey wasn't over yet. The Elorians had been saved, but now came the next challenge: finding them a new home. Humanity had stepped up when no one else had. And now, they would carry the Elorians into a future where hope still existed. The journey through space felt long, but for Captain Jessica Hayes, every minute was crucial. The human fleet, now carrying thousands of Elorians, was making its way to the nearest habitable system. The mission to save the Elorian people had become more than just an evacuation. It was a symbol of humanity's determination to help, even when the odds seemed impossible. On board the Saratoga, the crew had settled into a routine, but the weight of their responsibility was always present. Captain Hayes often walked the halls, checking in on her crew and the Elorians they had rescued. Every new face she saw reminded her why they were doing this. They had not only saved a species, but they had given them a chance at a new life. The Elorians had settled into their temporary quarters, making the best of their situation. Many of them were still mourning their lost home, but there was a quiet sense of gratitude among them. They knew they had been given a second chance, a chance they would never take for granted. Commander Jason Patel approached Hayes one evening, his face a mix of concern and determination. "Captain, we've received word from the Elorian Council. They're asking about the planet we've selected for them. They want to know more about it, its resources, its climate. They want to be sure it will be a safe home for their people." Hayes nodded, understanding the gravity of their request. The Elorians had been through so much. They had trusted humanity with their lives, and now they were asking for the one thing they had lost: home. Have our science teams gathered the necessary data? We need to be ready to present it to them. We've got the data, Patel replied, but we need to make sure everything checks out before we give it to them. It's important that they feel secure in their new home. I'll take a look at the reports myself, Hayes said. We're getting closer to our destination, and I want to be sure we're prepared for everything. If we're going to help them rebuild, we need to know this planet will be the right fit. The next few days were filled with reports and meetings. Hayes and her crew worked tirelessly to ensure that the new world would be a suitable refuge for the Elorians. The planet they had chosen, while habitable, would require careful preparation. There were storms on the surface, unpredictable weather patterns that needed to be studied. But the scientists were confident that with the right modifications, the planet could be transformed into a new home for the Elorian people. As they neared the planet, the Elorians began to gather, eager to learn more about their future. Captain Hayes stood before them in the main hall of the Saratoga, a large screen displaying images of the new world behind her. The room was quiet, the Elorians' faces filled with anticipation and hope. "We've found a new world for you," Hayes began, her voice steady, but filled with compassion. "This planet is not without its challenges, but it has the potential to be your new home. Our teams are already working on preparing it for you, and we will be there every step of the way to help you rebuild." Kyra, the Elorian leader, stood at the front, her eyes reflecting the hope and uncertainty of her people. "We are grateful, Captain," she said softly. "But after everything we've been through, how can we know that this new world will truly be ours? Will it be like Eloria, or will we have to start over from nothing?" Hayes paused, understanding the depth of Kyra's question. "You'll have to start fresh, yes, but you'll never be alone. Humanity will help you, guide you, and stand by your side. You've lost so much, but you still have your strength. Together, we will make this new world a place where your people can thrive." Kyra nodded slowly, her face still filled with uncertainty, but softened by the captain's words. "Thank you. It is more than we could have hoped for." As the fleet drew closer to the planet, Hayes knew that this was only the beginning of the journey. The Elorians had been saved, but there was so much more work to be done. The new planet needed to be made ready, infrastructure had to be built, and the Elorians needed time to heal from the trauma of their losses. But humanity had shown them that they were not alone in the universe. They had been given a second chance. The ships began their descent toward the planet's surface. The once feared storms were now a distant memory, and the atmosphere seemed more welcoming as the fleet entered the planet's orbit. It was time to begin the next chapter. Captain Hayes watched the Elorians as they gazed out the windows, seeing the new world for the first time. Their expressions were a mix of awe and fear, but there was hope there too. They had been through so much, but now they had a chance to start anew. "Prepare for landing," Hayes ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for." As the ships touched down on the surface, the Elorians stepped onto the new world, their eyes wide with wonder. The planet was unlike anything they had ever seen: green hills, blue skies, and vast oceans. It was different from Eloria, but it was beautiful in its own way. "We've made it," Kyra whispered, looking up at the sky. "We've really made it." And with that, the Elorians began to take their first steps into their new future. The journey had been long, but it was only just beginning. The humans had not only saved a species, they had given them the chance to rebuild, to create a new world where they could live in peace and hope. Humanity had kept its promise. The Elorians would never be alone again. As the days passed, the Elorians began to settle into their new world. The human teams, who had worked tirelessly to prepare the planet for their arrival, continued to assist in every way possible. They built homes, established schools, and ensured that the Elorians had access to all the resources they needed. It was a massive effort, but the humans knew that they couldn't stop until the Elorians had everything they needed to thrive. Captain Jessica Hayes stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out over the newly established Elorian settlement. The soft breeze blew through her hair, and the distant sounds of construction filled the air. There was a sense of hope here now, a sense of new beginnings. Commander Jason Patil approached her, his footsteps light against the concrete. "Captain, the teams are reporting good progress. We've managed to stabilize the water supply, and the shelters are nearly complete. The Elorians are starting to adapt to the new environment." Hayes nodded, but her gaze remained on the settlement below. "It's incredible," she said softly. "After everything they've been through, they're already rebuilding. It's like they've never lost hope." "We gave them a reason to keep fighting," Patil said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's humanity's way. We don't give up." Captain Hayes smiled back. "True. We'll keep doing what we can." They're not just survivors now. They're starting to believe in a future, and that's something we'll help them build. The days turned into weeks, and the Elorian people slowly began to form their new society. They had been through so much, losing their homes, their families, their planet, and yet they were finding strength in each other. They built schools for their children, and the adults worked together to create a sustainable future for their people. The Elorian Council met regularly with the human leaders, and Captain Hayes was often invited to speak with them. They discussed everything from farming methods to educational systems, making sure that the Elorians had the tools to thrive. It was a partnership, a bond that was quickly forming between the two species. One day, Kyra, the Elorian leader, approached Hayes as she oversaw the construction of a new school. Her bright green eyes reflected both the joy of the moment and the weight of the responsibility she carried. "Captain," Kyra began, "I wanted to thank you again. For everything. You've given us more than just shelter. You've given us hope. We were lost, and now we are building again." Hayes looked down at her, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "You're the ones who are doing the hard work. We're just here to help." Kyra smiled, her alien features softening. "Without you, we wouldn't have had the chance to start over. You've given us a future, Captain. I don't know if we'll ever be able to repay you for that." "You don't have to," Hayes replied, her voice steady. "Seeing you all take those first steps into a new life, that's more than enough for me." As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting an orange glow over the settlement, Hayes couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The Elorians were rebuilding their lives, and humanity had played a key role in that. But this wasn't just about saving a species. It was about showing the universe what humanity was capable of when it came together to help others. The Elorians weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. They were starting families, planting crops, and embracing the new world that had been given to them. And humanity was right there beside them, guiding them through every step. But even as the Elorians flourished, there were still challenges ahead. The planet wasn't perfect. There were still storms to contend with, resources to manage, and dangers lurking in the unknown corners of the galaxy. But Captain Hayes knew that the Elorians were strong. They had survived the worst, and now they had a chance to build something better. In the distance, Hayes saw a group of Elorian children running through the fields, laughing and playing. They were full of life, their faces shining with the joy of a new beginning. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of promise. As night fell, the stars above them shone brightly, just as they always had. Humanity had made a promise to the Elorians, to help them rebuild, to give them a second chance, and they had kept that promise. The journey wasn't over. There would be more obstacles to overcome, more challenges to face. But together, humans and Elorians would continue to move forward, side by side. And that, Hayes realized, was all they needed to face whatever the future held. Weeks turned into months, and the settlement continued to grow. The Elorians were becoming more comfortable in their new home, but there was still work to be done. Captain Jessica Hayes, along with her crew, continued to support them, but now it was clear. The Elorians were no longer simply survivors. They were thriving. They were learning to adapt to their new environment, building stronger communities and planning for the future. One afternoon, as Hayes walked through the bustling market area of the settlement, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The streets were lined with stalls where Elorians traded goods, their laughter and conversation filling the air. The settlement, once a barren land, had transformed into a vibrant place of hope. "Captain, over here," called a familiar voice. It was Commander Jason Patel, who waved from a nearby construction site. He was overseeing the expansion of the Elorians' new homes. "You've got to see this," he said as Hayes walked over to him. They stood together, watching as a group of Elorians worked to plant rows of crops in the fertile soil. It was a small but powerful moment, the first real signs of self-sufficiency. "It's incredible," Patel said, his voice full of admiration. "Just a few months ago, they didn't even know if they would survive. Now, they're starting to grow their own food." Hayes smiled, watching the workers. "They've come a long way." "Thanks to you and your crew," Patel added. "We've done our part, but they've done the hard work. They've rebuilt their hope, and now they're making it a reality." As they continued to watch, Kyra, the Elorian leader, approached them, her steps graceful and her eyes full of determination. "Captain Hayes," she said warmly, "I wanted to thank you for everything once more. We are becoming strong again, and it's all because of you." Hayes shook her head, her face soft with humility. "It's not just me. You and your people have been the ones to truly rebuild. You've shown the world what true strength is." Kyra nodded, but there was a deep respect in her eyes. "Your kindness gave us a chance when no one else would. It's a gift we'll never forget." The captain paused for a moment, considering Kyra's words. "It's not just about giving you a chance. It's about showing that we're all in this together. Whether it's humans or Elorians, we all have something to contribute. We all have a role in making the universe a better place." Kyra's eyes sparkled with understanding. "And we will continue to contribute, Captain. We will always remember that humans were the ones who saved us, and we will do everything we can to help others, just as you have helped us." The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of fresh soil and new beginnings. Hayes looked around, her heart swelling with pride. The Elorians were no longer lost. They were standing tall, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. They had found their place in the universe, and they would build a life full of hope, just as humanity had shown them was possible. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the settlement, Captain Hayes stood on the balcony of the command center once again, looking out at the growing community below. The Elorians had created something beautiful here. They had made this place their own, and humanity had helped them get there. In the distance, she saw families walking hand in hand, children running freely through the streets, and adults working together to continue building their new society. The Elorians were no longer a people just trying to survive. They were flourishing. Jason Patel stood beside her, his voice quiet as he took in the scene. "They're going to be okay, aren't they?" Hayes nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes, they're going to be more than okay. They're going to thrive, and humanity will always be there to help them when they need it." Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Hayes felt a sense of peace. The Elorians had found their new home, and humanity had played a vital role in making that happen. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something even greater. The partnership between humans and Elorians had proven that when two species came together, they could overcome any challenge. Together, they would build a future where both could thrive, united by the belief that no one should ever have to face the unknown alone. And as the stars began to twinkle above, Captain Hayes knew that the future was full of endless possibilities, a future where humanity's kindness, compassion, and strength would continue to shine brightly across the galaxy, helping others in need, just as they had helped the Elorians.